World War II transformed the tank from a supporting weapon into one of the most decisive instruments of modern warfare. Never before had armored vehicles played such a central role in shaping campaigns, collapsing fronts, and determining victory or defeat on land. Steel, engines, and firepower became the language through which nations fought for survival. At the outbreak of the war, many military leaders still viewed tanks as auxiliaries to infantry, machines meant to advance slowly, provide cover, and exploit breakthroughs created by foot soldiers. That belief collapsed almost immediately. Early campaigns revealed a brutal truth. Wars would no longer be won by holding ground inch by inch, but by speed, shock, and armored maneuver. Germany demonstrated this reality with terrifying clarity. Concentrated tank formations, coordinated with aircraft and motorized infantry, smashed through enemy lines and advanced faster than defenders could respond. Entire armies were encircled not because they were destroyed, but because tanks moved too fast to stop. The battlefield became fluid, chaotic, and unforgiving. Other nations adapted quickly. The Soviet Union embraced mass production, prioritizing simplicity, mobility, and reliability. The United States focused on logistics, standardization, and overwhelming numbers. Britain emphasized combined arms and defensive coordination. Each philosophy produced tanks that reflected national strategy, industrial capacity, and battlefield experience. As the war progressed, tank design became a relentless arms race. Thicker armor demanded larger guns. Larger guns required stronger engines. Stronger engines increased weight, stressing suspensions and supply lines. Every improvement created new problems and new solutions. The result was a generation of armored vehicles that were not just weapons, but complex systems balancing firepower, protection, mobility, and reliability. Tanks also reshaped the psychology of war. The sound of engines approaching, the sight of armored columns on the horizon, and the helplessness of infantry without anti-tank weapons created fear long before shots were fired. Morale often collapsed before defenses did. This documentary explores the top 10 tanks of World War II, machines that did more than fight battles. They defined doctrines, exposed weaknesses, and changed how nations thought about war itself. From legendary heavy tanks to revolutionary medium designs, these steel giants shaped the outcome of the largest conflict in human history. While names like Tiger and Panther dominate popular memory, the true backbone of Germany's armored forces throughout World War II was the Panzer IV. It was not the most powerful tank, nor the most feared, but it was the most important. More than any other German design, the Panzer IV fought from the opening shots of the war to its final days. Originally conceived as an infantry support tank, the Panzer IV entered service with a short-barreled gun designed to fire high-explosive shells against enemy positions. In the early campaigns in Poland and France, this role proved effective. Enemy armor was limited, and speed and coordination mattered more than raw firepower. The Panzer IV fit perfectly into Germany's early blitzkrieg doctrine. Everything changed on the Eastern Front. The sudden appearance of heavily armored Soviet tanks exposed the Panzer IV's limitations and forced rapid adaptation. Rather than abandoning the design, German engineers upgraded it. Longer, more powerful guns were installed. Armor was thickened. New optics improved accuracy. Over time, the Panzer IV evolved from a support vehicle into a capable main battle tank. What made the Panzer IV exceptional was its adaptability. While more advanced tanks suffered from mechanical complexity and limited production, The Panzer IV could be manufactured, repaired, and upgraded in large numbers. Crews trusted it. Commanders relied on it. Supply chains were built around it. Even as newer designs entered service, the Panzer IV remained indispensable. On the battlefield, it proved versatile. It fought tanks, supported infantry, and defended against breakthroughs. It served on every major front, from the deserts of North Africa to the frozen plains of Russia. By the war's end, it had become the most produced German tank of the conflict. The Panzer IV did not symbolize German technological ambition. It symbolized endurance. In a war defined by rapid change, it remained relevant through constant improvement. And in doing so, it earned its place as one of the most significant tanks of World War II, not because it was perfect, but because it was always there. If any tank became a symbol of raw battlefield terror, it was the Tiger one. Introduced in 1942, this German heavy tank was designed with one purpose: to dominate enemy armor through overwhelming firepower and protection. Wherever the Tiger appeared, it changed the behavior of both enemy soldiers and friendly commanders. The Tiger's greatest strength was its gun. The 88mm cannon, adapted from the famous anti-aircraft weapon, could destroy enemy tanks at distances far beyond return fire. Allied crews often found themselves hit before they even saw the Tiger. On open terrain, this range advantage was devastating. Armor that had once felt secure suddenly became irrelevant. Protection matched firepower. Thick, vertical armor plates made the Tiger extremely difficult to penetrate from the front. Early Allied anti-tank guns struggled to stop it, forcing crews to rely on flanking shots, air attacks, or artillery. For infantry, facing a Tiger head-on often meant withdrawal rather than engagement. Psychologically, the Tiger's impact was immense. Reports of its presence spread fear across battlefields. Allied troops frequently mistook other German tanks for Tigers, exaggerating their numbers and influence. German propaganda amplified this effect, turning the Tiger into a myth as much as a machine. Yet the Tiger had serious weaknesses. It was heavy, slow to manufacture, and mechanically complex. Breakdowns were common, especially on long marches or in harsh terrain. Fuel consumption was enormous. Recovery of damaged Tigers was difficult, and abandoned vehicles were often destroyed by their own crews to prevent capture. In pure combat terms, the Tiger was unmatched. But war is not fought by single machines alone. Its limited numbers meant it could not change the overall course of the war. Instead, the Tiger represented a broader lesson of World War II. Absolute battlefield dominance meant little without mass production, reliability, and logistics. The Tiger. I did not win the war for Germany, but it ensured that wherever it fought, it was remembered. If the Tiger represented brute force, the Panther represented evolution. Introduced in 1943, the Panther was Germany's attempt to correct its greatest mistake, underestimating Soviet tank design. Built in response to the shocking appearance of the T-34, the Panther combined firepower, armor, and mobility in a way that many historians consider the most effective overall tank of the war. The Panther's gun was its defining feature. The long-barreled 75mm cannon delivered exceptional penetration and accuracy, capable of destroying enemy tanks at long range with deadly efficiency. Unlike earlier German designs, the Panther could engage effectively while on the move, giving it tactical flexibility across open battlefields. Armor design marked a major breakthrough. Sloped frontal armor dramatically increased protection without excessive weight, allowing shells to ricochet rather than penetrate. This innovation, borrowed directly from Soviet engineering, made the Panther far more survivable than its armor thickness alone suggested. From the front, it was extremely difficult to destroy. Mobility completed the package. Despite its size, the Panther was fast and agile, capable of keeping pace with mechanized formations. On the Eastern Front, it excelled in long-range duels, often destroying enemy tanks before they could respond. In defensive battles, Panthers became lethal ambushers, exploiting terrain and distance. However, like many advanced German designs, the Panther arrived too early and too late at the same time. Rushed into combat at Kursk, early models suffered severe mechanical failures. Engines overheated, transmissions failed, and inexperienced crews struggled to maintain the complex machine under battlefield conditions. Once refined, the Panther became Germany's most dangerous tank. But production never reached the scale required to change the war's outcome. Allied bombing, resource shortages, and logistical collapse limited its numbers. Meanwhile, the Allies countered with overwhelming quantity and improving tactics. The Panther proved that balance, not brute strength alone, defined the future of armored warfare. It pointed the way forward, but arrived in a war Germany could no longer win. When the German army first encountered the Soviet T-34 in 1941, it faced a shock that rippled through every level of command. The T-34 was not just another enemy tank. It was a revolution in armored warfare. Simple, rugged, and brutally effective, it exposed the weaknesses of German design philosophy and forced an urgent rethink that would shape the rest of the war. The T-34's greatest strength lay in its balance. Its sloped armor offered protection far beyond what its thickness suggested, causing shells to ricochet harmlessly. This design dramatically increased survivability without adding excessive weight, a concept Germany had not yet fully embraced. Combined with wide tracks, the T-34 moved effortlessly across mud, snow, and rough terrain where other tanks bogged down or failed entirely. Firepower matched its mobility. The 76.2mm gun, and later the more powerful 85mm variant, could destroy most German tanks at combat ranges. While not as precise as German optics, the T-34 compensated with simplicity and reliability. It worked in extreme cold, dust, and chaos, where more complex machines often broke down. Perhaps most decisive was how the T-34 was built. Soviet industry prioritized mass production over perfection. Factories relocated east of the Urals produced thousands upon thousands of tanks. Welds were rough, interiors were cramped, comfort was irrelevant. What mattered was that the tank could fight and keep fighting. On the battlefield, the T-34 overwhelmed the enemy through numbers and endurance. Individually, it could be matched. Collectively, it was unstoppable. Waves of T-34s crushed German defensive lines, absorbed losses, and kept advancing. It became the backbone of the Red Army's push westward. The T-34 did not just win battles, it changed how tanks were designed worldwide. Its influence is visible in post-war armored doctrine across every major power. In World War II, no tank shaped the future more profoundly. It was not the most refined machine of the war, but it was the most transformative. If the T-34 represented mass and momentum, the German Tiger I represented terror. When the Tiger first appeared on the battlefield in 1942, it immediately changed how Allied forces fought. This was not a tank designed for speed or numbers. It was built to dominate through sheer firepower and armor. Wherever a Tiger appeared, it demanded attention, planning, and often overwhelming force to defeat. The Tiger's most feared feature was its 88mm gun. Originally developed as an anti-aircraft weapon, it proved devastating against armor. Allied tanks could be destroyed at ranges where they could barely respond. Crews often knew they were being targeted long before they could see the Tiger itself. One accurate shot was usually enough. Armor reinforced that dominance. Thick, vertical steel plates made the Tiger nearly invulnerable from the front to most Allied guns early in its deployment. Infantry anti-tank weapons were largely useless. Facing a Tiger head-on was often a death sentence, forcing Allied units to rely on flanking maneuvers, artillery, airstrikes, or sheer numerical advantage. But this power came at a cost. The Tiger was complex, heavy, and mechanically fragile. Its weight strained engines, transmissions, and suspensions. Fuel consumption was enormous. Breakdowns were common, especially during long movements or retreats. Recovery of disabled Tigers was difficult, often impossible under combat conditions. Production was another weakness. Tigers were expensive and slow to build. Germany could only field them in limited numbers, never enough to influence the war strategically. While a single Tiger could dominate a battlefield, it could not be everywhere. Psychologically, however, the Tiger was priceless. Allied soldiers feared it intensely. Crews painted kill markings proudly. Even rumors of Tigers in an area could slow advances and force changes in tactics. The Tiger I was the embodiment of German engineering philosophy: quality over quantity. It was a battlefield predator, deadly, intimidating, and unforgettable. But in a war decided by industry and scale, fear alone was not enough to win. If the Tiger I was built to inspire fear, the Panther was designed to win the war Germany could no longer afford to lose. Introduced in 1943, the Panther was Germany's attempt to combine firepower, protection, and mobility into a single balanced machine. On paper, and often on the battlefield, it was one of the most effective tanks of World War II. The Panther's greatest strength was its gun. The high-velocity 75mm cannon could penetrate Allied armor at long range with remarkable accuracy. Unlike earlier German tanks, it allowed Panther crews to destroy enemies before they came close enough to return fire. Against tanks like the Sherman or Cromwell, this advantage was often decisive. Armor design marked a major leap forward. Instead of relying solely on thickness, the Panther used sloped armor, increasing effective protection while keeping weight manageable. Its sharply angled front plate could deflect shells that would have pierced flatter armor. This design philosophy would influence tank construction long after the war ended. Mobility was another key advantage. Despite its size, the Panther was fast and agile, capable of keeping pace with mobile operations on the eastern and western fronts. In ideal conditions, it combined speed with striking power better than almost any contemporary tank. But the Panther entered service too soon. Rushed into combat during the Battle of Kursk, early models suffered catastrophic mechanical failures. Engines overheated, transmissions broke down, and suspensions failed under stress. Many Panthers were lost without ever engaging the enemy. Even after improvements, reliability remained an issue. Maintenance required skilled crews and spare parts Germany increasingly lacked. Fuel shortages limited operational use. A powerful tank sitting idle was useless. In combat, however, a well-functioning Panther was lethal. Allied crews respected it deeply, often prioritizing Panthers as targets above all others. When Panthers were properly supported, they could dominate entire sectors. The Panther symbolized Germany's late-war dilemma: exceptional engineering trapped inside a collapsing industrial system. It was one of the finest tanks ever built, but it arrived too late, in too few numbers, to change the outcome of the war. The M4 Sherman was never the most powerful tank of World War II, but it was the most important. While German tanks chased perfection, the Allies pursued something far more decisive: reliability, mass production, and battlefield integration. The Sherman became the backbone of Allied armored forces and, ultimately, one of the key instruments of victory. Designed for ease of manufacture, the Sherman could be produced quickly and in enormous numbers. American factories turned out tens of thousands of units, ensuring that losses could be replaced faster than the enemy could destroy them. Where German units fought with scarcity, Allied forces fought with abundance. Mechanically, the Sherman excelled. It was reliable, easy to maintain, and could operate for long periods with minimal downtime. Crews valued it not for invincibility, but for consistency. A tank that always started, always moved, and always fired was far more valuable than a superior machine stuck in a repair yard. In combat, the Sherman faced serious challenges. Early models struggled against heavily armored German tanks like the Panther and Tiger. Its main gun often lacked the penetration needed for frontal engagements. But the Sherman was never meant to fight alone. Numbers, coordination, and tactics compensated for technical shortcomings. Shermans worked as part of a system: infantry support, artillery, air power, and logistics formed a combined arms network that overwhelmed German defenses. If one Sherman was destroyed, another quickly took its place. If an enemy tank appeared, fighter bombers were called in. War was fought as a team effort, not a duel. The Sherman also proved adaptable. Variants mounted heavier guns, flamethrowers, rocket launchers, and specialized equipment for engineering tasks. From the beaches of Normandy to the Pacific Islands, the Sherman fought everywhere and kept moving. In the end, the Sherman demonstrated a fundamental truth of modern warfare: victory does not always belong to the strongest weapon, but to the force that can deploy, sustain, and replace its weapons faster than the enemy can respond. The Panther was Germany's answer to a hard lesson learned on the Eastern Front. When German forces first encountered the Soviet T-34 in 1941, it was a shock. Existing German tanks were outmatched in armor, firepower, and mobility. The Panther was designed as a direct response, and in many ways, it succeeded. Introduced in 1943, the Panther combined three qualities that defined an effective tank: strong frontal armor, a high-velocity main gun, and excellent mobility for its size. Its sloped armor dramatically increased protection without excessive weight, while its long-barreled 75mm gun could destroy most Allied tanks at long range with deadly accuracy. On the battlefield, the Panther was extremely dangerous. From defensive positions, it dominated open terrain, knocking out enemy armor before they could respond effectively. Allied tank crews learned to fear its frontal silhouette, knowing that direct engagement was often suicidal. However, the Panther's strengths came with serious weaknesses. Rushed into service, early models suffered from mechanical failures, especially in the transmission and engine. Maintenance was complex, spare parts were scarce, and crews required extensive training. A Panther was powerful, but fragile in the wrong conditions. production also limited its impact. Germany could never build Panthers in number sufficient to change the war's outcome. Each loss was difficult to replace, while Allied tanks continued to arrive in overwhelming quantities. Despite these flaws, the Panther is often considered Germany's best overall tank of the war. It struck a balance between firepower, protection, and mobility that influenced tank design long after 1945. It proved that technical excellence could still shape the battlefield, even if it could not overcome strategic reality. If the German Panther represented technical balance, the American M4 Sherman represented a different philosophy, one that ultimately proved decisive. The Sherman was not the most powerful tank of World War II, nor the best armored, but it was reliable, adaptable, and produced in numbers no other nation could match. In total war, that mattered more than perfection. Introduced in 1942, the Sherman became the backbone of Allied armored forces. It was easy to manufacture, easy to maintain, and easy to transport across oceans. While individual Shermans were often outgunned by German Panthers and Tigers, they rarely fought alone. Allied doctrine emphasized coordination, logistics, and combined arms rather than tank versus tank duels. On the battlefield, the Sherman excelled in mobility and reliability. It could operate for long periods with minimal maintenance, even under harsh conditions. Crews trusted it to start, move, and fight when needed, something that could not always be said for heavier German designs. Variants were rapidly developed, including improved guns, better armor, and specialized versions for engineering, recovery, and flamethrowing. Critics often focus on the Sherman's vulnerabilities, especially early in the war. Its thinner armor and gasoline engine made it more susceptible to catastrophic damage when hit. But these weaknesses were offset by overwhelming numerical superiority and constant improvement. Later models with more powerful guns narrowed the gap significantly. Most importantly, the Sherman embodied the strength of Allied industry. While Germany built tanks individually, the United States built an armored system, factories, spare parts, training, fuel, and replacements flowing continuously to the front. The Sherman proved a central lesson of World War II armored warfare. The best tank is not always the strongest one, but the one that arrives on time, in massive numbers, and keeps fighting. If the T-34 symbolized balance and mass production, the Soviet IS-2 represented raw power. Designed in response to heavily armored German tanks, the IS-2 was built for one purpose: to break through fortified positions and destroy enemy armor at close range. It was not subtle. It was devastating. Entering service in 1944, the IS-2 carried a massive 122mm gun, one of the most powerful tank weapons of the war. A single hit was often enough to destroy any German tank, including Tigers and Panthers. Even near misses could cripple enemy vehicles through sheer explosive force. German crews feared it not for its speed, but for its ability to end a fight instantly. The IS-2 was heavily armored, especially at the front, designed to withstand direct hits from German anti-tank guns. Its sloped armor reflected lessons learned from earlier Soviet designs. While slower and less agile than medium tanks, it was never meant to maneuver freely. The IS-2 advanced with infantry and artillery, smashing defensive lines and opening paths for follow-up forces. On the Eastern Front, IS-2 units played a crucial role in late war offensives. They spearheaded assaults on fortified cities, bunkers, and defensive belts. In urban combat, their high-explosive shells demolished buildings and strongpoints, turning German defenses into rubble. The IS-2 had limitations. Its large ammunition reduced rate of fire, and mechanical reliability was not perfect. But in the context of Soviet doctrine, overwhelming force, relentless advance, and coordinated assaults, these weaknesses mattered little. The IS-2 embodied the Red Army's late war transformation. Fewer compromises, more firepower, and total focus on breaking the enemy's will. It was not just a tank. It was a battering ram on tracks, driving straight toward Berlin. The American M4 Sherman was not the most powerful tank of World War II, nor the most heavily armored, but it became one of the most important. The Sherman proved that wars are not always won by the strongest weapon, but by the one that can be built, supplied, repaired, and fielded faster than the enemy can respond. Introduced in 1942, the Sherman was designed with reliability and mass production in mind. American industry turned it into a global presence. Tens of thousands were built, shipped across oceans, and deployed on every major front, from North Africa and Western Europe to the Pacific. No other Allied tank appeared in such numbers or such diverse environments. The Sherman's strength lay in consistency. It was mechanically reliable, easy to maintain, and comfortable for its crew by wartime standards. Standardized parts meant damaged tanks could be repaired quickly, often returning to battle within days. This logistical advantage allowed Allied forces to sustain armored operations at a scale Germany could not match. In combat, Shermans faced formidable opponents. German Panthers and Tigers outgunned and out-armored them in direct engagements. But American doctrine did not rely on one-on-one duels. Shermans fought as part of a combined system, supported by infantry, artillery, air power, and overwhelming numbers. When one tank was lost, another took its place. Upgrades extended the Sherman's relevance. Improved guns, better armor, and specialized variants adapted it to changing conditions. Flamethrower versions cleared bunkers in the Pacific. Tank-destroyer coordination compensated for its firepower limits in Europe. The Sherman demonstrated a critical lesson of World War II. Industrial capacity and logistics could outweigh technical superiority. It may not have been the most feared tank, but it was the tank that kept rolling, advancing, and winning until the war was over. The German Panther was born from shock. When German forces encountered the Soviet T-34 on the Eastern Front in 1941, they realized their existing tanks were outclassed. The Panther was the response, a tank designed to combine firepower, armor, and mobility into a single, lethal package. In many ways, it became the most balanced tank Germany produced during the war. Introduced in 1943, the Panther featured sloped armor that dramatically increased protection without excessive weight. Its high-velocity 75mm gun could penetrate most Allied tanks at long range, often before the enemy could respond. On open ground, the Panther was a deadly hunter, capable of destroying opponents with precision and speed. Mobility was another strength. Despite its size, the Panther could move quickly across terrain, especially on the Eastern Front's vast plains. Its wide tracks provided good traction in mud and snow, conditions that crippled many other vehicles. When operating properly, the Panther was one of the most dangerous tanks on the battlefield. But perfection came at a cost. The Panther was rushed into service before its design was fully mature. Early models suffered from severe mechanical problems, engine fires, transmission failures, and breakdowns that sidelined tanks without enemy contact. Maintenance was complex, and spare parts were often unavailable as Germany's industrial situation worsened. Production limitations also reduced its impact. Panthers were expensive and time-consuming to build. While formidable, they never appeared in the overwhelming numbers needed to change the war's outcome. Each loss was difficult to replace. The Panther represented Germany's engineering brilliance and its strategic weakness. It was a superb weapon introduced too late, in too few numbers, and supported by an industrial system already collapsing. On paper, it was one of the best tanks of World War II. In reality, it stood as a reminder that even the finest machines cannot compensate for failing logistics and lost time. The American M4 Sherman was never the most powerful tank of World War II. It was not the best armored, nor did it carry the largest gun. Yet no other tank influenced the outcome of the war as profoundly. The Sherman's true strength lay not in raw power, but in reliability, numbers, and the industrial system that stood behind it. Designed for mass production, the Sherman was simple, robust, and easy to maintain. American factories produced it in staggering quantities, allowing Allied forces to replace losses quickly and keep armored units at full strength. While German tanks were often sidelined by mechanical failures, Shermans were constantly in motion, rolling off assembly lines and straight onto ships bound for Europe and the Pacific. On the battlefield, the Sherman relied on doctrine rather than dominance. It was meant to fight as part of a system, supported by infantry, artillery, aircraft, and logistics. Against heavier German tanks, like the Tiger or Panther, Shermans often faced a disadvantage in direct combat, but they compensated through coordination, maneuver, and sheer numerical superiority. One Sherman might fall, but another would take its place. Reliability was critical. The Sherman could travel long distances without breaking down, cross bridges that heavier tanks could not, and be repaired quickly under combat conditions. Crews trusted it to start, move, and fight when needed. In war, dependability often mattered more than perfection. The Sherman also proved adaptable. Variants mounted different guns, flamethrowers, mine-clearing devices, and amphibious equipment. From the beaches of Normandy to the jungles of the Pacific, the Sherman served in almost every environment imaginable. The M4 Sherman embodied the Allied approach to war. Overwhelm the enemy not with a single superior weapon, but with an entire system that could not be stopped. It was not the most feared tank of the war, but it was the one that kept coming. The tanks of World War II were more than weapons of their time. They became the foundation of modern armored warfare. Each design reflected the priorities, strengths, and limitations of the nations that built them. Speed versus armor, firepower versus reliability, quality versus quantity. These choices did not just decide battles, they shaped the outcome of the war itself. The German Tiger demonstrated the terrifying power of superior firepower and armor, but also revealed the limits of complexity and over-engineering. The Panther showed how innovation could redefine battlefield balance, yet still suffer from logistical reality. The Soviet T-34 proved that simplicity, mobility, and mass production could overwhelm even the most formidable enemy. The American Sherman showed that wars are won not by perfect machines, but by systems that work, again and again, without stopping. World War II taught armies a brutal lesson. Tanks do not fight alone. Those that succeeded were part of combined arms warfare, working with infantry, artillery, air power, and logistics. Tanks that advanced without support were destroyed. Tanks supported by a functioning war machine became unstoppable. After 1945, every major army studied these lessons. Post-war tank design evolved directly from World War II experience: sloped armor, diesel engines, stabilized guns, and crew survivability all trace their origins to this era. Even modern main battle tanks carry the DNA of these wartime machines. But beyond technology, these tanks symbolize something deeper. They represent the industrial, human, and strategic forces unleashed by total war. Each tank was built by thousands of workers, crewed by young soldiers, and sent into battles that defined nations' futures. Steel rusts, engines fall silent, but the lessons of these tanks endure. World War II was the age when armored warfare came of age, and the machines that fought it changed how wars would be fought forever.